I remember the day the previous sheriff suddenly resigned like it was yesterday. I was sitting at my desk, sipping my lukewarm coffee, when the dispatcher's voice came over the radio, requesting my presence in the sheriff's office. I thought to myself, what's this about? As I walked in, I noticed the sheriff's door was open, which was unusual. He usually kept it closed, especially when he was meeting with someone. My first thought was, what's going on, when I saw the sheriff packing up his things. He looked up, and our eyes met for a brief moment. I could sense the tension in the air. Honestly, at that point, I was just tired. I'd been on shift for 10 hours, and all I wanted to do was go home and grab some dinner. The sheriff called me over and handed me a folder. "Deputy, I'm leaving," he said, his voice low and serious. I was taken aback, but I didn't show it. I've learned to keep my emotions in check, especially in situations like this. I opened the folder, and inside, I found a letter of resignation, effective immediately. I thought to myself, this can't be happening. The sheriff was leaving, and I was the senior deputy on duty. I looked around the office, and it hit me, I was the only one left to take the job. I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, anxiety, and a hint of dread. I never wanted to be sheriff. I was happy being a deputy, doing my job, and going home at the end of the day. As I stood there, trying to process what was happening, the dispatcher's voice came over the radio again, announcing the sheriff's resignation to the entire department. It was like the whole room fell silent. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to step up. I decided to call the county commissioners, informing them of the situation and offering to take on the role of interim sheriff. I didn't want the job, but someone had to do it, and I was the only one left standing. I remember that call like it was yesterday. I was sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to shake off the fatigue that had been building up over the past few hours. Honestly, at that point, I was just tired. I'd been on shift for 10 hours, and my mind was starting to wander to the warm dinner my wife had promised to cook for me when I got home. I noticed the radio crackle to life, and my dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional as always. Unit 12, we have a possible domestic disturbance at 1456 Oakdale Road. Neighbors reporting loud arguing and sounds of breaking glass. My first thought was, not again. Domestic calls were always a crapshoot, you never knew what you were walking into. I decided to take a deep breath, grab my keys, and head out. I was the only one available to respond, so I knew I had to move quickly. As I flipped on the lights and sirens, I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. My training kicked in, and I went into autopilot mode. As I pulled out of the station, I caught a whiff of the sweet aroma of freshly cut grass wafting through the open window. It was a strange contrast to the tension building in my chest. I made my way down the deserted main street, the only sound being the hum of my engine and the occasional chirp of the radio. I turned onto Oakdale Road, and my eyes scanned the houses, looking for any signs of trouble. The GPS led me to a small, weathered ranch-style house with overgrown bushes and a faded welcome to our home doormat. I could hear the muffled sounds of yelling and shattering glass as I pulled up to the curb. My heart rate picked up a notch as I grabbed my mic to call in my arrival. Unit 12 on scene. Requesting backup. I stepped out of the crisp evening air and into the musty foyer of the small ranch-style house. The call had come in as a domestic disturbance, and I'd responded with a mix of caution and experience. My first thought was that this was going to be a long night. The smell of stale cigarettes and yesterday's cooking lingered, making my stomach turn. I noticed the worn-out couch, the cluttered coffee table, and the faint scent of desperation that clung to the walls. As I made my way deeper into the house, I saw the family huddled together, their faces etched with worry and fear. The husband, a gaunt man in his mid-30s, stood tall, his eyes darting between me and his family. My gaze locked onto him, and I sensed a tension that didn't quite fit. His story spilled out in a rush, something about an argument, a misunderstanding, and a lot of yelling. Honestly, at that point, I was just tired. I'd been on shift for 10 hours, and my mind was already processing the possibilities. But as he spoke, I watched his eyes, his body language, and the way he avoided direct answers. Something didn't add up. His words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this explanation in front of a mirror. I decided to take a step back, to observe, and to listen. The wife, a petite woman with sunken eyes, clutched her children close, her gaze fixed on me like I was her only hope. The kids, two boys with messy hair and wide eyes, seemed to be trying to shrink into the background. I took a deep breath, my training kicking in. I'd seen families on the brink of collapse before, but there was something about this one that didn't sit right. I made a mental note to ask more questions, to dig deeper, and to find the truth behind the husband's carefully crafted words. As I stood there, surrounded by the chaos of this family's life, I knew that I was about to unravel a web of secrets and lies. And I was ready. I stepped out of the dusty cruiser, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing through the stillness of the rural evening. The call had come in as a suspicious persons report, and I'd arrived to find a ramshackle farmhouse, its windows like empty eyes staring back at me. As I approached the entrance, I noticed the door hung crookedly, as if it had been forced open recently. My first thought was that whoever was inside might still be on the premises. I pushed open the creaking door, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm, and called out to announce my presence. The only response was the creaking of old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. I moved cautiously, my eyes adjusting to the dim light within. The air was thick with the smell of decay and neglect. As I cleared each room, my senses on high alert, I began to suspect that this wasn't your average abandoned farmhouse. There was something off, something that didn't sit right. Honestly, at that point, I was just tired. I'd been on shift for 10 hours, and the last thing I needed was a wild goose chase in the middle of nowhere. But then, I saw it, a faint seam in the wall, almost imperceptible, but my trained eye caught it. I pushed on the panel, and a hidden door swung open, revealing a cramped, dimly lit room. The air inside was stale, and the smell of sweat and fear hung heavy. My heart rate picked up as I took in the makeshift cell, the chains, and the evidence of God knows what kind of atrocities. In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice, turn a blind eye or risk everything to uncover the truth. My gut told me that this was just the tip of the iceberg, that there were people involved who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the implications, and knew that I had to see this through, no matter the cost.